Start security operations tonight. All right, so administrative security. This is controls established by management with things like policy, not technical devices like firewalls. Least privilege or minimum necessary access is one of the main ones to make sure you don't have privileges you don't need to know, compartmentalizes things. Separation of duties means that no one person can do something critical alone. Two people have to work on it together. One does it, one reviews it. So this means you cannot do a terrible thing deliberately wrong unless you make a conspiracy where two people collude to work together to do a bad thing. A rotation of duties and job rotation are where people move from one job to another. This is considered a good practice because it mitigates fraud. Someone could figure out a system of committing fraud by concealing the paperwork or controls in one position, and then when they rotate and someone else takes over that job, that would be exposed. The same reason why you make people take vacations and be replaced by someone else periodically so you can make sure that their job is being done in the correct way. Non-disclosure agreements. You have to sign for almost every job saying you will not expose their proprietary secrets. And then background checks are ignored something like 70% of the time, even verifying what people put on their resumes. While a lot of resumes have lies on them, but it is a best practice, absolutely, to check resumes, call the references and make sure people are not lying, and do a background check to see if your prospective employees have a criminal record before you hire them. You could save yourself a lot of grief that way. So privilege monitoring, which I mentioned before in the last chapter, you check to see these high privilege activities that are going on to see if something bad is happening, like account creation and deletion. You might have an administrator creating extra administrative accounts for illegitimate reasons. Things like reboots, backup and restore, access to source code, and audit logs are all things that should be audited to see if they are being accessed inappropriately. And then there's forensics. Forensics is looking on computer or electronic devices to find evidence to see what has happened. Now, in the police context, you have a crime and then you have a crime scene and you're trying to reconstruct the crime. In a company, it's not often focused on exactly what you call a crime. It's more violations of security policy and network intrusions and such. And your goal is not necessarily so much to track down who did a bad thing, it's just to find out what happened and prevent it. Anyway, so you collect evidence off machines. There are anti-forensic software that make forensics difficult. For example, you can have malware that's entirely memory resonant, so it doesn't leave any trace on the hard drive. And this is increasingly common, so modern forensics almost all have to be done live forensics, where instead of the old system where you would turn off a computer, kick out the plug, do an abnormal shutdown, and then image the hard drive, and that's all the evidence you would get. Now you run software on a compromised machine and copy the contents of RAM. So you get the actions that are happening right now, network connections, running processes, and so on. So you acquire the evidence, you identify where the evidence might be, then you acquire the evidence from those machines, then you analyze it, and then you produce a report. This is the general phases of the activity called forensics. So forensic media analysis, I just described live capture, where you run some software on a machine that copies the data off the machine from RAM or the hard drive. You can also make a binary image of storage devices, hard disks, flash drives, DVDs, anything you got. If you make a complete binary image of the hard drive, then you might be able to recover deleted files. This is mainly something you can do if you have magnetic hard drives. It's not very successful with modern SSDs. So there's four kinds of data on hard drives. There's allocated space, which is files that have a name and they're in the directory, they're in use. There's unallocated space, space that is not currently allocated to be in a file, and it will contain fragments or even complete deleted files. Then there's slack space, which is a little bit of space at the end of clusters, at the end of active files, which might contain a small amount, like a few hundred bytes of data left over from an old file. Usually there's nothing too valuable there. And then there's bad blocks, clusters and sectors that have been marked bad by the drive controller and are no longer used, but they can't be erased because the drive controller won't let you write there anymore. And often the fact that there's been an error on there doesn't mean that all the data is unreadable. So those might contain considerable amounts of data that cannot easily be erased. All right. However, I must say slack space and bad blocks are almost never used in practice. There's very rarely anything good there. all the stuff you find is typically in allocated, unallocated space. All right, so you can back up a binary image of a disk with Norton Ghost or FTK Imager or Ncase. These are many tools that can do it. The Linux DD command can do it. And then there's network forensics. This is where you copy network traffic and you monitor it to see if you can detect suspicious activities. So it's essentially the same thing as network intrusion detection, although forensics would be retroactive. Intrusion detection is live to detect an attack in progress and perhaps block it. Network forensics would probably be looking at archived data from the past. So you look at emails, web traffic, IM conversations, file transfers, and many other things on your network. So forensic software, if you have a binary file to analyze, you can reverse engineer malware, which is part of the world of forensics. You often have to determine what the malware does with static or dynamic analysis so you can find out indicators of compromise, like files or registry keys it creates. And for this, you use disassemblers and debuggers and virtual machines to run the malware in for dynamic analysis. And we do a lot of that here in the malware analysis course. Then there's embedded device forensics. You may have SSDs or handheld devices. These will be things like routers, switches, firewalls, smart cameras, GPS units, cell phones. Many devices here all have SSDs in them, and they're all storing data, and you can get data off them to analyze. Let's see, I see a comment here from Zoo. I had installed AVG antivirus, and then tried to test my gateway to see whether it was a Windows server. At that time, I dumped the memory, but I found out some other free software is doing the same thing. I didn't know this. Okay. It tried to test your gateway to see if it was a Windows server and IIS. Well, that's interesting. Not sure what that's about. All right, another related topic to forensics is e-discovery. If you get sued, then you will get a court order saying you must turn over all documents about this thing, and then you have to search through all your backup tapes and everything to find that evidence. And this can be very expensive or difficult, and if you don't do a good enough job, you can lose in court. A judge can summarily rule against you if your discovery is ruled inadequate. So anyway, it's another category of essentially forensics, e-discovery. All right, and then there's incident response. Incident response is dealing with security issues that come up. 10 years ago or so, people often believed that you could have defensive measures like firewall and antivirus, and that was all you had to have, and there would be no security problems inside your network. Now, we know that's not possible because of the advanced persistent threats, the original ones from China, but now lots from Russia and Iran also. We know that there is really dangerous stuff out there that can punch through all your defenses, and so you will have bad guys on your network, even if you have put up the best defenses you can buy. So you have to have instant response to detect intrusions and respond to it. So you prepare for instant response by having a trained team and monitoring devices and such. Then you have detection. Somehow you can monitor your network and detect breaches. Then you have a response. The first thing you do is contain the breach so it doesn't keep spreading, usually by taking systems offline. And then you have an eradication event where you clean up all the malware and intruders and kick them off. Then you report on the results. Then you recover all the damaged systems back to full functionality and remediate the flaws that let them come in. And then you have a post-mortem where you consider lessons learned. And instant response is a gradual thing that improves with practice. And the normal way you rate the quality of your instant response team is by how long it takes them to do all this. How long can a bad guy be intruding on your network before they get caught and evicted? And most companies, when they're not having an instant response team, it takes like 270 days to detect an intruder. And as you develop an instant response team and your team gets better, then you bring that time down. So the preparation is training, writing procedures, for giving people tools they need. All right. And here you often have a checklist, incident handling, so determine whether an incident has occurred, containment, eradication, and recovery steps, then a post-incident activity. So there are recommended steps to go through here. So detection is analyzing some kind of evidence to find out if you have been intruded upon, and this typically is done with network traffic or with log file analysis. The problem is there's a lot of strange things that happen on computer networks that are not security incidents. So response is containment. You're trying to prevent further damage to the network, trying to isolating systems or powering them off. Then you take images of them, and of course, this will impact your business. Some of your systems will go down for a while during this process. So of course, you have to have management approval for that. Then mitigation is determining the cause of the incident. You have to figure out a root cause of how they got in so you can clean up the systems and close the holes so they can't come back in the same way. And reporting, you have to keep track of reports. There's a technical report for your technical team of what products you used and what signatures you found and such. And then there's a non-technical report that goes to your non-technical stakeholders like mission owners and business, and your PR department has to summarize the situation in a non-technical level so people know what to do. I remember when there was a fake virus outbreak at the college, it was handled very badly, and because our CTO just wanted to create a security incident to make himself seem like a hero, so he told the newspaper, and the headlines came out saying there was a virus incident, and people were just calling around the college trying to figure out what to do. They didn't know whether it was safe to use computers, or they needed to change their password, get a new credit card, and that's the kind of thing you have to deal with in the non-technical part. You need to communicate to people the non-technical consequences. What happened, and what does it mean for me? What do I have to do? It's a very sensible question, and it's not a technical thing. They want a simple answer like, is it safe to use my computer? Then you recover, restore everything back to its original operations, and monitor to see if the infection or attacker returns. It is very common that you discover an incident, you try to end it, and you don't succeed because they had some other backdoors you didn't find, so you kick them out, and then they just come back. So this is a real important to monitor to see if they come back. That's another test of the quality of your incident response team. When they kick somebody out, do they really stay out, or do they just come back? And then remediation. This is fixing the vulnerabilities. One thing that almost always is part of this is switching to two-factor authentication. That is, say, something like 80 or 90% of the time, the way they got in was phishing, and the best cure for phishing is strong two-factor authentication. Google said when they switched to USB key hardware-based two-factor authentication, the phishing success rate went down to 0. That's what they said a few years ago. So this is considered to be extremely effective. It's expensive and complicated, but it's worth doing because it will block the number one way that bad guys get in your network. All right, and then lessons learned. Every time you have an instant response, you should keep track of what you've done and figure out what you could have done better and improve for the next one. You have to keep improving because the bad guys are improving. Their tools are improving. You have to keep running just to stay in the same place. And then root cause analysis, of course. You try to figure out what really caused the problem. If you don't do that, then another person or the same group could come back the same way. You really should find out what the security flaws are in your network that made it possible for someone to get in. All right, so let's do this Kahoot, which is 7A. All right. Pigs. Yep, pigs. All right. I'll wait a few. Oh, okay, we got more people. Good. All right. So you're gathering evidence for a lawsuit. That's discovery. E-discovery is computer discovery. Discovery order is what a judge issues when he says you must turn over all the evidence about this topic, and e-discovery is the electronic version of that. All right, which control is also called compartmentalization. Need to know, also called horizontal controls. Even if you're cleared for top secret, that doesn't mean you get all top secret information. You only get the top secret information where you have a need to know. All right, which control requires your personnel to keep secrets? Yep, non-disclosure agreement. All right, you have to sign those pretty much anywhere, and every person in any position of responsibility has to keep secrets, like doctors and lawyers and security professionals. You know confidential information. All right, how about writing IR policies? That's preparation for incident response. All right, which one contains a non-technical explanation? All right, that's reporting, okay. And how about submitting a final report to management? That's the postmortem, after everything's over, including a review of lessons learned and such. All right. So, all right. All right, and that's Damien. Oh. And this. There we go. 36. And we're hunting this 6. Okay, good. All right. So let me stop this recording.